This is the story of the day that I met Hamza bin Laden. And to make it make any sense, I have to tell the story in 4 parts, which are first the backstory, or really several backstories, that are seemingly unconnected threads that all come together on that day and thereafter. The events as I experienced them and recall, what I learned later about my experiences and the events, and then an analysis of what I believe about the situation based on my skills as an analyst. So, sometime quite a long time ago, I don't have the exact dates, 2 different men independently left their homes as adults and went to seek their fortune elsewhere. One was from Maine and one was from Yemen. So the man named Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden moved to Saudi Arabia, and there he founded a construction company. Of course, in Saudi Arabia, any construction would be intricately tangled with all the great oil industry of Saudi Arabia. At some other time, more or less in the same era, a young man of prestigious family wanted to get out from under his father's shadow in Maine. And so the son of Prescott Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, moved to Texas to seek his fortune there, and there obtained a job as a salesman of oil drilling equipment, particularly selling the bits that are used to drill the rock. And his business prospered, as did Muhammad's business. And eventually they came to meet. And they came to do some business together. And this is not about how much business they did together or how little, but they did meet. And their families met. They both had children, both had young men growing up. And so, somehow or another, this now little jump into an analysis, the only way the story to me makes sense is that at some point these young men met each other. Why is that important? Because they knew each other's faces, and that is the only reason it's important to this story. So, you know the rest of that history. One of those Bush boys was George W. Bush. Another one was Jeb Bush, and 2 others, I can never remember their names quite right. They have kept very, very private. I think one of them is Willard, but maybe it's Wilkin. Doesn't matter. Maybe there's I don't know. They are very private men and enforced it. They're well-to-do and had enough lawyers that they could enforce privacy and enforce that their pictures would never be published until very late in life, when they began to allow it, after their 2 other brothers were no longer in the national spotlight. Muhammad, on the other hand, had a son named Osama, whom we all know of, Osama bin Laden. He plays a part in this story. And as I mentioned in the title, it's about Hamza, and Hamza is a very young, or was until a couple weeks ago, a very young son of Osama bin Laden. So, then there is another backstory. I became to be involved years and years and years ago, which I will not recount in detail now, I'll recount in a different video, with work with the South Sudanese and their aspiration for freedom from the Arab domination of the Khartoum regime and the genocide thereof, and the long struggle. And how I came to be of help in that is another part of the story. but just, I was. Another part, and this is just backstory, so I won't do detail of it, I'll put that in another video. I received a phone call a few days after 9/11 in 2001 that someone I knew had contacts in Khartoum who could pinpoint the exact location of Osama bin Laden. And I reported them, not on the hotline because it was not properly set up yet, but I reported them to a member of the personal staff, official personal staff of a cabinet member of the United States government. This person happened to be a friend of mine from church. One thing and another, and the cabinet member talked to the head of the FBI, and the next thing I knew, we were talking to FBI agents. And that went on for several years. And I ended up being a volunteer analyst for the FBI and a volunteer at intelligence gathering networks involving people who simply would not, for cultural reasons, talk directly to the FBI in America. So, but I had continued my work with the South Sudanese community. As a matter of fact, what I just described was part of my work with the South Sudanese community. And I became a member of the Nashville chapter of the SPLM, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, which is the political wing of the SPLA, the Sudan People's Liberation Army. I also got involved with a international orphanage organization, a good Christian organization whose name will not come into the video because it is irrelevant and they're not political. And I got also involved with the editor of a Christian monthly newspaper. Also not going to mention, it's not a secret, it's just, they don't need their name tangled in this. So, here I was, and I got a phone call in 2005, in June, would I go with my friends Henry and Deborah Martin to Khartoum to photograph their trip to Khartoum for the inauguration of John Garang as first vice president of Sudan, which was and as president of the autonomous region of South Sudan, which was a offshoot of the CPA, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, which had been signed about 5 months before. And so, one thing and another, I said yes, I would go. Someone gave the funding for me to go. I also got press credentials from this Christian newspaper. And so I ended up going to Nairobi on my way to Khartoum with wearing something like 5 hats, as they say. I had 5 different purposes going. I was going there as a representative and photographer for the Nashville chapter of the SPLM. I was going there as a reporter, photographic reporter and photographer for the Christian newspaper I mentioned. I was going there to explore needs of orphanage work for the orphanage organization that I represented. And I was going there to gather information, more information, and talk to native field agents for the FBI. So, the latter was a little bit of a sketchy thing to do because the head of military security of the nation of the Islamic Republic of Sudan had placed a $50,000 bounty on my head. Fortunately for me, there was no name attached to that bounty. It was only the man who did thus and so, who we know by his work. Okay. there was another member of our delegation who also had a similar bounty on their head. So we went. Later, it was 6 of us, 3 Anglos, as you might say, and 3 who were born in South Sudan and living in Tennessee. And I was living elsewhere, but I still had my Tennessee contacts. So we went. Later, when we compared notes, we discovered that every one of us had come to the same calculation in deciding to go. And that was that our chances of suffering death, serious injury, or imprisonment on the trip were in excess of 60%. But we went because we felt it was important to go. So we went, expecting trouble. So I got to Nairobi, and it turned out it was harder to get to Khartoum than I'd expected. I was supposed to, just with the strength of a certain letter, be put on the airplane, and the SPLM was supposed to convey me to Khartoum. It turned out that there were a whole lot more of those letters than there were seats on airplanes available. So I met a wonderful man at the airport named Samson Kwaja, who was the guy in charge for the SPLA of determining who got what seat on the airplane, on which airplane, to Khartoum from Nairobi. And he was working through my name on the list, and since there were 6 in the delegation, and he was able to scratch off 5, then he could satisfy everybody when he put me on the airplane by saying he scratched off 6 names. He was a very inventive guy. He didn't mention to the people who asked his reason for putting me on the plane, about when he justified it with those 5 names he scratched off, that those 5 people were already in Khartoum, having flown direct from London. But that's beside the point. They didn't ask, he didn't tell. But he was up to something else, which is why he really put me on the airplane, and I did not know that. We'll get to that later. But it had to do with somebody that I sort of looked like, and somebody who actually is the brother of somebody I sort of kind of looked like. And therefore, I might have been a member of that family by appearance sake. Okay. And since nobody knew what they looked like. One interesting thing that happened, might as well put in this video as anything else, there was a fellow by the name of David, is it Rob, something like that. He was a former Army Ranger who had joined the State Department as a military rep for to be the military attaché at embassies and so on, but he was doing field work. He was the military rep associated with the SPLA, the Sudan People's Liberation Army, the rebel army that had gained the comprehensive peace agreement with the people they were rebelling against. So he had been in the field with them for years, and while he was there was a shipment of radios came in direct from the White House, ordered by President George W. Bush. They were highly secure radios. The box, about this big, was worth over $1 million. Because these were radios that were specially developed by Motorola for the Secret Service with an encryption algorithm that not even the NSA could break or knew the codes to. So not even the NSA could listen in on the security detail, so the so-called the detail, with these radios. They were not for everybody in the Secret Service, only for the detail. They had just been first delivered to the White House, and the president ordered that they be sent to South Sudan. Why? Because our intelligence knew that there was trouble planned in Khartoum. See, I had an intuition. And they knew that every mode of communication that the SPLA had was compromised, being listened into by the Khartoum regime. So our government, U.S. government, had some plans, which they did. It turned out the next day they jammed all communications, except for those radios. But here was this box, and here was this David, and he had a lot of business to do, and he hands me the box and says, guard this for me, it's worth $1 million. This is at the special use, rarely used terminal at Jomo Kenyatta Airport in Nairobi. Sort of a seedy place at that time. So I guarded the box. He went about his business, but I wondered, I mean, does he trust any American he meets in the field that much? So finally we get on the airplane and somebody asks, and I, just take my seat and coach, and somebody says, aren't you supposed to be up front? And I thought they were asking, because I have a white face, I was the only white face beside David on the airplane, and I guess, white face up front in first class, I wasn't going to push that. I did not want to get to the door, lose my seat, and then be told, no, you don't belong up here. So I stayed in my seat. Okay. About that time, David Robb comes back, asks for another seat. He sits 2 rows behind me. I've got a picture somewhere of him sitting, me on the airplane. You can see him sitting 2 rows behind me. And they're asking him, why aren't you in first class? No, I'm supposed to be back here. I'm going, why is he back here? Whatever. Maybe camaraderie, I guess. I put it down to camaraderie, So we go to Khartoum. I get billeted with a bunch of generals in an improvised facility in a converted school building next to a mosque and somewhere in Khartoum. And the next day we go to the inauguration, and I get ushered in the door. I get put all the way up front, in front of the red velvet chain, and I'm seated on the floor because there was not enough room for the press in the press gallery. They didn't make a big enough press gallery. So I'm seated on the floor, maybe 30 feet from the podium where the president of South Sudan is going to be inaugurated. I almost shook the hand of Muammar Gaddafi. I probably could have, but I got a little bit nervous about asking the guard for permission to shake Muammar Gaddafi's hand. When Kofi Annan was dancing in joy, I could have reached out and touched him. But I was sitting there between the photographer for BBC and the photographer for Al Jazeera, right in the front row. 15 feet away was I always forget what it was, the president or the prime minister of Egypt. It's the one that has less power than the other, whose name you never hear about, was there, and so on. So we're all there. Found out later what was going to happen and didn't happen, and why. Went peaceably. We had the inauguration. We went. So we went to the Green Valley, I think, hotel. It's more like an old-fashioned motel with cabins. And we hung out for a day or two with all the cabinet members of South Sudan. I was trying to get to know people so we could do orphanage work. At one point we went to a fancy hotel, and I ended up sitting in the middle of the monthly meeting of the Muslim Brotherhood, which I did quite inadvertently. I just wanted a quiet place to sit with my laptop and do some articles. And so they were asking, maybe I didn't have my laptop, but I was just sitting quietly, and they were talking back and forth to each other, and I found out later from someone who understood Arabic that they were insulting me in a most vile manner. And when my face didn't even flinch and I totally ignored them, they knew I understood no Arabic, so they could go on with their meeting. See, they held their meetings in a lobby in the open. That made it impossible for anyone to sneak up on them or to put bugs in the... Well, actually, we made arrangements with a member of the hotel staff that we got acquainted with. Somebody, so that we could get the maintenance closet opened up, and all these sheikhs had laptops on the Wi-Fi, and we got permission to put a repeater in the Wi-Fi cabinet that would report directly to somewhere in Laurel, Maryland. You figure that one out. Anyhow, I dropped that one. I made the first arrangement, met someone, persuaded him that was a good idea, and let it go from there. Told somebody all about it on the NSA staff, and I don't want to know from there. I'm not my pay grade. So anyhow, so that's the kind of stuff we were doing. Encouraged an agent we had in the field, and I sat there and shook, thinking the secret police were going to show up at any minute and haul us away. But anyhow, the last day we were there in Khartoum, we were at the Green Valley at the lobby, and I'm out front. We're supposed to take a bus to the airport. I'm standing outside waiting for the bus to come to take me to the airport and my friends to get on with me, and up walks a man that looks exactly like Osama bin Laden. I mean, you could swear this is Osama bin Laden. Now, how could that be Osama bin Laden? Remember I said that people in Khartoum knew the exact location of Osama bin Laden? Now recall that for all the years that they said, oh, he's hiding in a cave in Afghanistan, when they finally went after him, was he in a cave in Afghanistan? No. He was in a very posh, luxury, armored compound in Pakistan. Not where they said he was. And you read a little bit of the story, they don't talk about it much, about how it had been built later, long after 9/11, and then he had flown in from somewhere. Well, he was a lot of that time in Khartoum. He still had his private jet. The people in Khartoum all knew his private jet. They would say, oh, there's Osama bin Laden's private jet at the airport. Oh, we looked through the chain link fence. Look, that's Osama bin Laden getting off of his private jet. They all knew that. The FBI knew that, but the CIA, for some reason, didn't want to act on that. I don't know. That's not part of my story. What I couldn't believe, why I couldn't believe it was Osama bin Laden, was I couldn't believe that he would show his face out in the open where people like David Raab, our U.S. government, State Department, military representative, are right there. Why would he risk it? But he walks right up to me, stares straight down at me. I mean, he's much, much, much taller than me. And I'm thinking, did he have a brother that looked just like him? Does he have a son that's old and gray that looks just like him? Whatever. But that's Osama bin Laden. No, it couldn't be. For years, my brain just kept saying, it couldn't have been. Other people said, yeah, it had to have been. It was. And I'm going, no! Well, anyhow, so there he is. And he literally bumped into me, made a look of disgust, and walked off. Hey, he's the guy all dressed up Arab style, jalabia, the whole bit, you know. And he just doesn't like us European types, you know? So, okay. So we're hanging off the bus, and there's this couple of teenagers hanging out there. I mean, they could have, you know, I thought, well, they could have been as old as college age, but they seemed like, you know, like high school juniors or something, you know, on a lark. Teenagers on a lark, you know? Something interesting's happening at the hotel. We're rich, spoiled kids. They acted like rich, spoiled kids in all this Arab, you know, the jalbia, the fancy, the headpiece, the whole bit. And they're just spoiled brat rich kids. That's what they acted like, two of them. And when the time came to get on the bus to the airport, which was supposed to be for all these diplomats and government officials of South Sudan, plus us members of the SPLM from Nashville, we're to get on the bus, and I get on the bus because that's what I'm supposed to do, and I'm afraid my friends aren't going to be there, but I get on the bus. And while I'm sitting on the bus, these two teenagers come and sit right next to me. And they're talking and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And it's just giving me the heebie-jeebies. They're just a little too attached to me, you know? I'm getting a little bit too much personal attention here. All right. Well, eventually somebody very official comes on and tells them they have to get off the bus. My friends show up, the bus pulls away. We go to the airport, we get on an airplane, we fly to Rumbek, South Sudan. I get to South Sudan, everybody I meet that are very important officials. I remember Malik Agar. I meet him at the airport. Somebody introduces, another reporter introduces me to Malik Agar. He says, you know, Kenneth, this is Malik Agar. Malik Agar, this is, he says, we know Mr. Grimm quite well. And I'm going, I've never met this man. I mean, I would have noticed he's the size of a mountain, okay? And so, okay, we all know this man, huh? But they would refer, then somebody makes a joke about the Bush brother. They kept making jokes about me being the Bush brother, and I'm thinking, you know, the guy who is a brother to the Bush, the backcountry, you know, something like that. I don't know. So I'm there. And that was, a lot of exciting stuff happened. I'm not going to talk all about that, but there I am. So the Bush brother finishes his time and goes home. Now, things I learned later. First, the impetus for making this video. The other day, I saw a picture on the news. It was on many of the news. It was not a recent picture, obviously, but it was a young man named Hamza bin Laden, young son of Osama bin Laden, his heir. And he's just been confirmed dead, killed by a U.S. military operation. And I recognized his face. Now, I'm not good at faces. Very often I don't recognize faces well, but this one was drilled into my consciousness somehow. And that was that boy that as a teenager, apparently, seemed like a teenager, got on the bus with me, kept tight with me. Now, why would he do that? And why would Osama bin Laden walk right up to me in a crowd? Because with Hamza being there, then the fact that that was his father, Osama, okay, that pretty well confirms it to me. All right, that was Osama bin Laden. Well, what's the story? What did I learn later? About 3 months later, I learned that I had become officially considered a member of the headquarters guard unit, the Jamus Brigade of the SPLA, the Army. Hey, inducted into the Army at the age of 50-something. Interesting. I'm still proud of it, though. Proud of what I did to get in it. That's another video. What I did to deserve that honor. That's another video. But I also learned that the reason I was called the Bush brother was that the rumor had been spread over those compromised nets that I mentioned. Samson Khwaja had put out the word, it's a secret, don't tell anybody, and extremely don't let the Khartoum intelligence people know that President George W. Bush's younger brother, the one that nobody's ever seen, not Jeb, one of the ones that nobody's ever seen, his younger brother is coming to the inauguration, but he's coming incognito. Don't tell anybody. He's using a passport that says Kenneth A. Grimm on it. He even fooled the State Department representative. Everybody was listening in on that net. Everybody was in on the secret that I was really Willard, or whatever his name is, Bush. Why would they do that? Because what they knew from their intelligence, they couldn't reveal that they knew, because if they revealed that they knew, their agents would die. What they knew was that it was planned that there would be a machine gun and grenade attack at the height of the inauguration, and that John Garang would die, and the president, not Taha, his name slips my mind. Well, he's a scumbag anyhow. Omar al-Bashir would miraculously escape the attack. But most of the South Sudanese cabinet would die in the attack, as would John Garang. But as far as they knew, they now had President George W. Bush's brother sitting in the front row of where that attack was going to happen. And they couldn't afford a blood feud with the Bush family. That's what I was told, was what they had done and why they had done it. That's what I'm told. It makes it make sense. Now, I said there'd be a fourth part. That's analysis. the intelligence of Khartoum would want to know, was this really? Is this guy really the president's younger brother? Or is somebody just bull manuring us? Is somebody snookered us? How do you know? Well, we need a picture of him. There are no pictures of that man. Huh. But there's one man in Khartoum who knows from his teenage years what that man looks like. And that man is the man who, as a teenager, played with knew another teenager, as their fathers were in business together. A man named Osama bin Laden. So my analysis is that he was sent, risked showing his face in the open, where Western intelligence, Western newspaper reporters might see him. Not that there were many Western newspaper reporters, they didn't cover the event very much. But he risked it because Khartoum intelligence wanted to know if I was him. And it only took one look for him to know that I was a ringer. I was a horse that was racing under a different name. Oopsie! Why would Hamza be there? Hamza was to keep an eye on me, I believe. That's why he was texting all the time. To keep an eye on me so that I wouldn't escape the police. But I got out of town just in time. That's my analysis. I admit I could be wrong. But I know my skills are good because I know how much the FBI trusted my skills when I worked for them. So that's my story of the day I met Hamza bin Laden.